Good morning and welcome to today's NEASC Virtual Globe Forum, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in Learning Communities. Excuse me. I am Kevin McCaskill, the Executive Director at Madison Park Technical Vocational High School in Boston and the Vice Chair of the NEASC Commission on Public Schools. With me today is Allison Gary, Deputy Director of the NEASC Commission on Public Schools. We are so pleased to have students and school leaders from a variety of schools with us today to share some of the steps they've taken within their school learning communities to raise awareness around issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion in order to promote school cultures that reinforce these values. The schools represented today are as follows: the International School of Helsinki in Helsinki, Finland, St. Luke's School in New Canaan, Connecticut, here in the United States, and also from the United States, the next two, St. Bernard's High School in Fitchburg, Massachusetts, and Sutton High School in Sutton, Massachusetts. Today's session is a conversation regarding the massively important issue of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Today, we will not solve every single matter regarding DEI, but it begins a conversation. It is important to note that every institution on this webinar is at a different place, a different level, and different stages of addressing, implementing, revising, and incorporating practices, strategies, and policies that will have impact on their respective communities. By listening to our panelists and the commentary offered, it is our hope that you will have a takeaway that will not only spur deeper thought, but will move you and your school community to definitive and concrete steps to further the work of creating school communities that foster diversity, champion equity, and are undeniably inclusive. And now I'd like to hand things over to my co-host, Allison, to get things started.
Thank you so much, Kevin. I appreciate your perspective and your willingness to host this webinar with me. Before we jump in with our schools, I just want to let you know what NEASC has been doing over the last year or so to address this topic. In June 2020, NEASC released a statement that says, in part, "We stand for justice, equity, inclusion, respect, and acceptance of diversity. These principles are deeply embedded in our standards for accreditation and are reflected in every accreditation visit and every report. Accreditation is granted only when schools embrace principles such as the school creates policies and protocols to define and support respectful treatment of all members of the school community. The school actively emphasizes and strengthens understanding of and commitment to equity and diversity, and the school community provides a safe, positive, respectful, and inclusive culture that ensures equity and honors diversity in identity and thought." The rest of this statement can be found on our website, which we've posted in the chat. We understand that this statement is just the beginning, and as staff members, we have been engaging in conversations around race, equity, and inclusion through a series of equity institutes led by facilitators to help us understand better what NEASC can do to support schools with these important issues. And today is the first step in that process. So now let's get on to the conversation and hear from our panelists. We're going to start by having each school introduce themselves and answer this question. Please share your school's journey to create a more welcoming, equitable, and inclusive environment for students. Let's start with St. Bernard's from Fitchburg, Massachusetts.
Good morning. My name's Heather Tullio. I'm the Director of Guidance at St. Bernard's. And give me a second. Okay, here we go. I hope you can see my screen. So we are a small Catholic school, about a half hour north of Worcester in central Massachusetts. We're small, 9th through 12th graders, and we have students from 22 local communities, including Southern New Hampshire. I'm a graduate from 20, 30 years ago. When I was here, St. Bernard's was a very white school. And even 4 or 5 years ago, we were still a very white school. Today, we have 32% students of color, but that's really only happened over the last few years. We've been doing this work for a year. Last spring, I had a video call scheduled with one of my seniors in the middle of the pandemic shutdown. And I thought we were going to be talking about scholarships and colleges and school stuff. And the student of color I was meeting with all she wanted to talk about was George Floyd and equity and inclusion and Black Lives Matter and protests and social media. And after that 1 hour conversation with her, I got off the phone and I thought it would be really a good thing for our students of color to have a safe space, to have these conversations with us and each other. So I reached out to my principal and I reached out to one of my English teachers, and they had both been thinking the same thing, that we needed to start doing some diversity work in a more intentional way. So with an enthusiastic yes from both of them and their willingness to be a part of it, I reached out to Dublin School in New Hampshire, where my husband teaches, and I know that they have been doing diversity work well for much longer than we have. So I got advice from several staff members there. They were super helpful. And then we started our first diversity, equity, and inclusion group last summer. We did meet on video over the summer, once or twice a month. And mostly what we did was we talked about Media Education Foundation videos. Teachers on the call, if you don't know the Media Education Foundation, they make fabulous videos, engaging, powerful videos designed for high school and college students. And they are all about race, gender, politics, really powerful videos. I recommend you check out their website, the Media Education Foundation. So over the summer, we divvied up videos and watched them on our own and then came back and discussed them. We did start in person September 9th, and we've been in person all year. So our diversity group is now meeting after school on Thursdays in the guidance department. And a few weeks ago, we brought in our first diversity guest speaker. This is Mr. Milton. He's a local professional, young professional, person of color, and he talked about his work with refugees for the last 6 years. And he also worked in the Peace Corps in Thailand. And I'm gonna toss it to Georgette, one of our students.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Georgette, and I'm a member of the DEI group here at St. Bernard's. As I've told both Mrs. Tullio and Finette, whom you'll meet in a few, the St. Bernard's I knew as a freshman compared to the one I know now is completely different. In the past, I felt kind of a disconnect between the staff and the teachers, but in just 2 years, the culture shifted completely, and now I feel as if all students can talk to their teachers about issues regarding diversity, equity, or inclusion and receive a positive response, which is a really good thing. Yeah, next slide. So our group is currently planning an all-school assembly where we'll have the time to address some misconceptions and address some questions and ultimately educate our community about our goals. So we sent out a few surveys to give our school the opportunity to ask questions and to voice their opinions. In our first survey, some examples of these questions included: why do we struggle even today in some areas of our country to accept that everyone is equal? How can teachers foster a more equitable classroom culture? And how can we help spread awareness? We are very excited to see how our assembly will turn out, and I'm going to pass it to Finette now.
Hi, my name is Finette Karangan. I'm also a member of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion group. And during these meetings, we just like to just sit and as a community and just share our social injustice and racial injustice that happens within the school and within our communities. And what I like about that is we just like have a chance to just talk about how we can just educate others and how we can just spread awareness to those in our communities and outside our communities as well. We also sent out another form to our school, which talks about the diversity in our school and if students have experienced racism and if friends in our communities and stuff like that have also experienced racism. And also throughout that form, we had a point where we ask students to share just a small story of them experiencing racism or having a friend that also has experienced racism. And some examples of those is some students of color has had parents that have learned English as their second language. My mother is one of them, and they have gotten through many racial slurs and many just derogatory words and terms towards them just for learning English as their second language. People have experienced it through social media and through other users that have experienced racial slurs, because that happens all the time. And then cultural appropriation and the excessive use of the N-word by non-Black people. People have experienced that. And then we also experience, people have also experienced religious injustice, where we have many people in our school that don't practice Catholicism, but we have people in our school that also practice Christianity and the Jewish faith as well. And they have experienced just religious injustice as that. And then there's have been people that have been told that they can't be here because of just the color of their skin or what they look like. And it's just, we do that in a way because we just want to shed light on it. And for the panel that we have coming up, we are just going to talk about these and just how we can raise awareness and how we can just teach people and just educate others on how we can just be a community as one instead of just being split apart from others.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. A question came up. Did St. Bernard's have professional development for staff so they feel qualified and confident to support students and adults when involved in conversations about racism? Heather, can you answer that question?
Not yet. We've been reaching out to departments. I've spoken with the English teachers about diversity in the classroom. I've spoken with the history teachers, but hopefully this summer we'll be able to do some professional development.
Great. And if any of the other schools want to address that in your presentation, that would be awesome. All right, we're going to go to the International School of Helsinki. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Rachel Thrash, and I am proud to be here from the International School of Helsinki. It's a 450 pre-K through grade 12 in Finland. But really, I want to share with you the voice of our students who are here, Diana and Carolina, who have started our Students Equity Group, which we call STAND, Students Together Against Discrimination. My co-faculty advisor, Alex Sibbald, is joining me as well, and Ben Thrash, the deputy head of school. They're going to tell you the story of how this year we came back, and it's been quite a tumultuous year in Finland, as it has been globally, but we've been back and forth between virtual and in-person teaching. But our students were really passionate about issues of diversity and eager to make a difference. And their story captures that. But I also want you to appreciate that we are a quite multicultural school, and our approach to student agency and autonomy and a focus on student leadership, and certainly diversity and equity has been for a long time a part of our curriculum, has really set the table. So students were primed in some ways to stand up and talk about these important issues and lead us and teach us. And so I hand it over to Carolina to tell our story.
I think actually Diana would like to start off just kind of describing the journey.
Yeah, so the creation of a student-led inclusion group at ISH was initially inspired by the discussion surrounding Black Lives Matter that largely increased in the media in March of last year. We held our first open meeting, so it was open to all students in August when we were back in in-person school. And we already noticed that not only was Black Lives Matter an initiative that we were all very passionate about and we wanted to use as our initial spark for our group, but also a variety of issues that we also wanted to focus on and open up discussions at ISH about. So for example, discriminations regarding being a member of the LGBTQ plus community, racial biases, sexism, any inequity that might happen in our local community. And so while we had these ideas during the planning process of our group, we further established more certain areas that we wanted to focus on so that we could really tackle them. We also directly asked parts of our student community through a survey. And after all this, we were then ready to introduce our group to the entire school community. And that's kind of what we did very recently in March. And yeah, I'll pass it on to Carolina to tell you more about that.
So yeah, we had this launch where we introduced many guest speakers to our school community, just kind of introducing what our group was and what we were trying to accomplish. And essentially, very recently, we've been focusing on implementing a more organized leadership structure to make sure that we are reaching objectives quite fast and making sure that our group finds its pace and that it can go on for many years in the future. So we're kind of focusing on making sure that it's a student-led group with, of course, the help of our teachers, and that students feel like they can communicate with us and have a voice within the school community. So that's kind of what we're very based around. We're trying to make sure that if there are any concerns within school or outside of school, we're addressing them and helping people find their own comfort space within our school as well. I think Mr. Sibbald, if you wanted to mention anything.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I mean, initially what we wanted to do, teachers, we wanted, well, we were having discussions about how we could reach out to students and make a more sort of inclusive and safer sort of learning space for our students. We felt something had to be done. So initially we were reaching out to students. Us teachers had the intention of creating surveys and responding to those surveys however they needed to be to help our students. But of course, after a few of these meetings with students, it slowly turned into Stand, what it is now. And instead of us teachers being there to serve the students themselves took over. They really took leadership of this initiative. And well, now, as you've just heard them speak and talk about the things they've done, they've been leading workshops, leading talks, hosting events, planning events for the future. So it's been really wonderful. And as Rachel has said as well, there is a big emphasis on student autonomy and then doing things themselves and sort of really taking leadership on that. And as you can see, they've done a fantastic job with that so far.
Terrific. Thank you so much. That was wonderful. Let's move on to St. Luke's.
Hello, my name is Jacqueline Nelson. I am the Director of Equity and Inclusion at St. Luke's in New Canaan, Connecticut. I am the third kind of official person in this role at St. Luke's. But before I get into our details, I did want my fellow St. Luke's students to just introduce themselves really quickly. Will?
Hi, my name is Will. I'm a junior, and I am the Vice Chair of our Diversity Leadership Council, which is our main diversity group. Zaire?
Hi, my name is Zaire. I'm a senior at St. Luke's, and I'm currently the student chair of our Diversity Leadership Council. So.
I have the privilege of joining St. Luke's 10 months ago, and I kind of already knew that they were invested in this work and were doing the work before I got there. I have to say I'm incredibly impressed by the student leadership and involvement in this work. It is incredibly inspiring. When I arrived, what drew me to St. Luke's was that the board had approved a vision for inclusive excellence. I've dropped in the chat a link to our website where you can find more information. But I think it's really important to highlight the fact that the board was in alignment and in agreement and in support of this work. It takes it a much further distance and makes it much more sustainable. So that vision for inclusive excellence outlines 3 focus areas for us: community, curriculum, and our culture. And what I want to say is that we have an equity leadership team that was originally the search committee for my role. That was originally 6 volunteers who were on a search committee. And we now have 22 volunteer faculty and staff who serve in that volunteer capacity, and they are focused on projects in alignment with our vision for inclusive excellence. So our curriculum committee is looking at ways of kind of doing a curriculum audit that actually centers the student perspective and not the teachers and what we think we should be teaching, because we know that our students are in most cases much further ahead than most of the adults in the building. Our community group is looking at what those required professional development experiences might be for faculty to be in alignment with our anti-bias goals and our culturally responsive practice goals. And then our culture group is collecting stories to better understand kind of the atmosphere where teaching and learning are taking place. When I joined this summer, I don't know about all over the world, but certainly here in the States, there was a reckoning of racism unlike we've seen before since the civil rights, I would venture to say. And in response to that, St. Luke's community with the head of school, Mark Davis, and our director of alumni relations and myself worked really deliberately to create ongoing conversations with our Black alumni so that we could respond in more targeted and meaningful ways to the issues that they were naming from their St. Luke's experience. And an outgrowth of that work, we now have an opportunity for our current Black students to be in mentored relationships with our Black alumni who have been more actively engaged this year. And that has been incredibly powerful. This year, we also had our very first Equity Leadership Conference in partnership with Pollyanna. And that was a really unique opportunity for us to invite all the constituents of the school, from current students. We are 5 through 12 co-ed secular school. All of students were invited, our alumni were invited, our faculty staff were invited, our parents, trustees, and administrators were all invited to a Saturday virtual gathering. And it was really incredible. I'll let Will and Zaire speak a little bit more to it. I will say we had in our alumni group alums from 1950 to 2020, right? So when you get a sense of what has happened, the change over time and where we still have work to do, that was a unique opportunity. And then finally, as I mentioned, I came to this school and the DLC was already in place, and I'll turn it over to Will and Zaire now to speak more about their leadership and the impact of that work, and some of the other things that they have been doing. So Will and Zaire, I turn it to you.
All right. As I mentioned, my name is Will, and I just kind of want to go into a little bit of what the student organized part of the deals or of our diversity, equity, and inclusion work looks like. So as I mentioned, our main group is called the DLC, the Diversity Leadership Council. It's an elected body of students along with two faculty advisors, along with Ms. Nelson, where we kind of put together and organize major programming and major events for the student body, as well as kind of just push to make our entire school climate more equitable and more inclusive. Alongside that, we also have a swath of affinity groups and just other affinity spaces. I started a group aptly called START. It's an anti-racism group, stands for Students Towards an Anti-Racist Transformation. So that's really with the focus of promoting anti-racism, especially for white people in our school community. We have a Black student union, an Asian affinity group, a Jewish affinity group, and a gender sexuality alliance. So those are our main affinity spaces. The DLC works with them to make sure that we're providing and making a more equitable climate with and alongside them. And then on top of all that, the DLC plans we helped plan the ELC in January, which Ms. Nelson mentioned. It had students, parents, alumni, faculty, staff, administrators, and trustees. So we would kind of break out into groups by constituency and then all come back together for a large debrief and kind of get the school climate as a whole. And the DLC also organizes an event called our Social Justice Leadership Summit, which happens every year. It actually just happened this last weekend. And that is a multi-hour long event on a Saturday, but only open to students and faculty. And so that's more with the intent of getting the students together with the faculty's kind of point of view and giving them a space to kind of go through and explain their experiences at St. Luke's, and just basically provide a space for people to bond and come together around this work. So I'm going to pass it over to Zaire to talk a little bit more about the other stuff we do.
Thanks, Will. Once again, my name is Zaire, and I kind of wanted to speak on a little bit about, my journey through equity and inclusion in the school. I kind of was involved from my freshman year. I dabbled and I talked to a lot of faculty, a lot of students, just about how they feel being, minority groups and even majority groups within the St. Louis community. But at that time, I didn't really have a role. It was kind of me just going off of my own curiosity. My sophomore year, we dealt with a lot of issues regarding diversity and equity, and me along with other students brought it upon ourselves to meet with our administrative board. We met with our head of school, our dean of students, and we kind of paved the way to get Miss Nelson here. I think one of the highlights of our equity career is kind of my sophomore year. A man named Anthony Ray Hinton made his way to our school. He basically spent 30 plus years on death row for a murder that he didn't commit. And he never got compensation from the state of Alabama. And so what we did was we talked to our congressman. We talked to him personally. We went and saw him in Alabama. We wrote letters to the district attorney down there. We wrote letters to the governor. We went on news stations and pretty much, fought for his justice. And that was kind of one of my highlights. Also last year, in the wake of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, those shootings, or those incidents rather, my brother and I went to our head of upper school and we constructed a dive-in, which is basically allowing our entire community, faculty, students, to come together and talk about basically the events that happened and, our immediate reactions to it, because we felt like that was an important space for us to be able to come into and just share our thoughts and opinions. And I think the most important thing is we have a pipeline, so to speak, and that, when I leave, this is my last year here, and when Will leaves, we kind of have people following in our steps. We have, we created a middle school diversity leadership council, I think was it this year? And, that's important. We connect with them and make sure that it's the same things that we're learning and the same kind of steps that we're taking, they're taking as well. And that way, we all can kind of be in this together. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much, St. Luke's. That was amazing. And we look forward to hearing from you again. All right. And last, we're going to ask Sutton. And I just want to say that I was just made aware last night that Ted McCarthy has just been named the Massachusetts Principal of the Year as a result of a lot of the work that he's done around social justice. So I just wanted to sort of call that out and let people know that. And go ahead, Ted. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm always super uncomfortable with that kind of stuff, but I'll take it in a global forum. So hi, everyone. My name is Ted McCarthy. I'm the principal here at Sutton High School. Unlike a lot of the schools you might have heard of, we are in a small town. It's a public school. Our school is about a little less than 400 students, and we are incredibly white. I love this picture of our kids. It was taken a few years ago at one of our basketball games. Everyone's smiling and they're excited to be at the game. But if you look at this picture, it's a pretty good composition of actually our school makeup, because you'll notice there's not many kids of color in the picture at all. And so how we do this work and how we got to this point might be a little bit different, but we are really confident that we're on the right path. So what we're trying to avoid and what we're trying to avoid for our kids and our community are these kinds of headlines, right? So these are just two recent events that we pulled off the New York Times website in recent days. And this could be any school in any state, any country. It could happen anywhere. And the reason that these things happen is that we're not having conversations at a high enough level with our kids and with our communities about this work. And if you're my age, and I'm getting older and older as we go here, my dad never sat me around the table to have the conversation, the kind of conversations that we're all having right now. And so you have a bunch of adults who are not raised, or many adults, many particularly white adults, who are not raised to have these conversations. And so then we perpetuate that same sort of lack of action, lack of knowledge onto our kids. And then we wonder why we have headlines like this. So here in Sutton, we had our issues. When I started about 8 years ago, my first year, we had a Confederate flag issue where a kid thought it'd be a great idea on Spirit Day to bring in a Confederate flag. We had another issue where with Colleen's leadership, we had gendered gowns where the girls would wear white and the boys would wear green because those were our school colors. And when we moved away from that practice, you would think that we had ended graduation in Massachusetts. So the community uproar was so significant. We wanted to put in a gender neutral bathroom so that kids could feel comfortable when they had to go to the bathroom in school. And again, there was a community uproar around that. But sort of the straw that broke the camel's back, my second year, was a basketball game. This was at the height of the Colin Kaepernick, sort of controversy. Our basketball team played a school from Worcester, and the school from Worcester was comprised mostly of kids of color. For the national anthem, the students on the other team knelt, and our white fans were so enraged that how could you disrespect the flag? Well, wouldn't you know who we played in the first round of the playoffs that year, but that same school. And what do you think the theme was for that night, for the basketball game? American Night. So kids were bringing Build the Wall t-shirts, waving American flags, and there was nothing patriotic about the message that they were sending. I'll never forget the game. After the game, we had won, and these three African-American mothers were standing in center court, and they were looking at our fans celebrating, and you didn't have to be a mind reader to say that those three moms are saying, that's a racist school. And so at that point, myself, Colleen, and a few of the other faculty just said, we're just going to start doing things differently around this topic because we just can't perpetuate this. And we were failing our kids. We're certainly failing our kids of color, and also our white kids because we just weren't having conversations. So Colleen's going to talk about the good stuff, but we've definitely come a long way. We've had dialogue groups, we have student groups, we have assemblies, all sorts of different things that we're doing intentionally now. It's just part of the regular way that we do school. And I think it's made certainly a positive change in our school community, and we hope even beyond the walls of Sutton.
Hi, my name is Colleen Modalzari. I'm the World Language Department Department Chair, Spanish teacher, and advisor of the Gender and Sexuality Alliance and of our Connections group, which is our diversity, equity, inclusion group here at Sutton High School. We call it Connections. Our students are trained by the Anti-Defamation League, the ADL. They have a program called A World of Difference. We do highly recommend this program if you're looking for a jump-off place, if you're feeling overwhelmed about training, about lessons. Contacting the ADL is a great place to start because they do have a lot of pre-made lessons, things that are ready to go, so it doesn't feel so overwhelming for the team of people working on this at your school. Also, my pronouns are she, her. So I just want to talk about our student programming that we have at Sutton High School. Like I said, it's called the Connections Group. Here you have a picture of some of our training taking place with the Anti-Defamation League. We also had a few years of a district learning team. So we had representatives from the elementary, middle, and high school, all of the administrators, principals present to talk about diversity and equity and how are we addressing those issues as a district. One of our major goals from that was to really fully develop the Connections program. So the Connections program is a group of 40 students, give or take, each year. Our school has 400 more or less, so about 10% of the students are involved in the Connections program, and it's operated like a club. We have a Google Classroom for it. We're constantly in communication. We have regular meetings every week, and here you can see a timeline of what we do in our Connections program. So in September, students get trained by the Anti-Defamation League. This is a 2 or 3 full day training. So what we really want to drive home is that if you're trying to do DEI work in your school, it takes time, it takes money, it takes dedication. So, if we put something in our mission statement, yeah, we want to make sure that we are including everyone and everyone feels safe. Well, what are the actions you're taking in your schedule? This might mean taking kids out of math, history, English, Spanish class. And that's okay because this work is just so important and so valuable. So those students involved do miss a couple of days of school to do this intensive training. We then meet weekly to talk about current event issues and practice lessons. And then those 40 students go into the freshman classes for a 6-week program where they facilitate lessons, anti-bias lessons. We talk about race, identity, gender, sexuality, implicit bias for 6 lessons with the entire freshman class. Although parents are informed, students do have the option to sort of opt out of this program. But as up to this point, no students have opted out. So I see that as a major win for our school. So all of our freshmen go through this training. And then in the springtime, we have a conference. We had about 700 people attending a virtual conference this year. And 2 years ago, we had 500 people in person attending a conference where we have presenters from all over to talk about various issues in DEI work. We also make sure that we are focusing on curriculum as well, right? There's student programming, but curriculum is huge. This is still an enormous work in progress. So our professional development time, we make sure we always have multiple dedicated hours, days to making sure what information are we teaching or not teaching? What narratives are we reinforcing? Are we enforcing a single story? And are we dedicated to constant review and improvement? This is not a one professional development fix, but a constant ongoing process. Specifically, we focused on the humanities classes and the English, history, and world language classes to sort of team up and look across the board and to see what narratives are being reinforced and what stories are not being included in our curriculum. That's been our focus recently. As far as professional development, we have used the Anti-Defamation League, like I said, also Facing History and Ourselves, who have been great, come to our school and offered professional development. History Unerased has amazing resources. They participated in our conference. Teaching Tolerance, which is now called Teaching for Justice, is it?
Learning for Justice.
Learning for Justice. They have incredible resources that are free and available, ready to go. This is a picture of Jeff Parati from the Safe Schools Initiative in Massachusetts, where you can get free LGBTQ plus professional development and sort of student empowerment for any LGBT affinity groups that you have. Ted, you want to talk about these real quick?
Yeah, real quick, because I know we're kind of limited for time. I just, the impact, I know it's one of the questions that we're going to get to later, is, we give surveys to our seniors and to all of our students at the end of every year. And over the years, what comes out is that students appreciate this work and appreciate the opportunity to have these conversations in a really meaningful way. And I think there was a question in the chat that talked about, like, what do you do with resistance? And we don't spend a lot of time worrying about the most cranky member of the community who thinks we're pushing our liberal agenda. Our job as schools is to promote positive, productive members of the community. You can only be a positive, productive member of the community if you have a good empathy and a good understanding of everyone who's in that community. That includes people who might not look like you or might not have the same experience as you. And so when kids know that, and when they want to have those conversations, and we can't wait for the adults to be comfortable to start having these conversations with kids. And every year, when we get these surveys back, we get these pieces of information from kids. And this just, again, reinforces the work. And then it's also things we can share with the community. So it's not just, it happens to be us and our crazy ideas. It's just actually that we're responding to the interests and the needs of the kids and trying to do right by them. So the picture at the bottom left, just to wrap up, one of the members of our connections team, she graduated last year. Freshman year, if you had gotten this girl to say two words, you would have been doing a good job. After the George Floyd murder last year, she organized a student-run, community-wide Black Lives Matter march in the center of our very conservative white town, and she's out in the front of the school with a bullhorn. And so if you can't tell me that's growth and that we're responding to her and her needs, I don't know what to tell you. But the nice thing about that day was it wasn't just our high school students. There were families with little kids. There were older folks. There were teachers. All sorts of people came for that Black Lives Matter march in Sutton, Massachusetts. And if you had told me that when I came here 8 years ago, I would have called you crazy. So just, again, reinforces the importance of the work and why it's so meaningful that we're all engaged in it. And then, yeah, okay. Well, that's good, Allison.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much, all of you. That was so inspiring and just wonderful to hear your stories. So Kevin has a question for the students.
Yes, definitely for the students. What can teachers and school leaders do to make students of color feel comfortable in their school environments? I think Zaire, you go ahead, please.
Yeah, I think the first step and the biggest step, in my opinion, is just to listen, because a lot goes under the radar when it comes to teachers and knowing what goes on within those student groups. And there's a lot that teachers do know because there's a lot they see in the classroom, but there's a lot that happens at parties and things of that sort. So I think once you get a teacher that really listens and really hears what you have to say and really hears and understands your experiences, then it kind of changes the game for, from the student's perspective. So,
Carolina? Thank you, Zaire.
I think just following off of that as well, what we're trying to do at our school is have these listening circles exactly for that reason, to make sure that people feel heard and feel like they can communicate to someone. And I think it's just important to know and just communicate to students that, like, if there is an issue, essentially teachers are there to help. And as long as you're kind of making sure that they know that, I think it could be really well done. So.
Other comments from any students on?
I think it's really important that teachers are open as well about their experiences if they feel comfortable. I think it's really important as a queer educator that I'm out to my students and that they see me as not only an ally, but someone who can relate to a lot of things. And I think it's really important in education, which is predominantly white, predominantly heterosexual and cisgender, that anytime we can sort of reach out a hand in that way, that it can be really impactful.
Will? Thank you, Colleen.
Yeah, I think the big thing for me has just been, it's just forging like personal relationships with my teachers, regardless of school. Like just finding out who, like the teachers that genuinely, like they care about me as a person and that I feel like I can go to with the same things I would go to with, like, to my parents or to a friend of mine. And I think just being able to forge that bond, especially at smaller schools, that's been the most kind of productive and helpful relationships I've had.
Thank you. Allison, you have the next question?
Yes. So thank you. In the Q&A, there's a lot of great questions, and panelists, certainly some of you are answering those, and that's super helpful because we won't have time, unfortunately, to answer all of them. But there seems to be a theme around sort of policy making, a policy about inclusion, and also a theme around assessing the school culture prior to taking steps, such as, there's a question from John, I'm sorry, it's moving around. So before making a hire, such as a diversity and inclusion coordinator, should we assess our culture and have meaningful conversations? The fear that if we just hire someone, but it's not strategic, it could create issues. So does any of our faculty or adults want to talk about this idea of sort of a inclusion policy and or how to assess the culture and determine what the best steps are in moving forward? Go ahead, Jacqueline. Thank you.
So what I'll say to that, having been at my previous school, the inaugural director of diversity and inclusion, and actually I'm officially St. Luke's very first senior admin reporting to the head of school director, right? Someone had the title, but not having in the position of the hierarchy. And I would say without policy, it can feel like a Sisyphean task of the work.
Right.
I mean, it feels that way no matter what, right? But without policy, without institutional support and understanding of what you're doing, I think that you run the risk of falling into misinterpretation of what the work is and what the work isn't, right? And that is where you get some of the backlash from the community without being able to ground it, right? And I think often that policy is made more strong when it is grounded in the school's mission, right? There are ways you can take the school's mission and develop a policy from there, right? At St. Luke's, our mission speaks to a moral compass, competence to lead, and a commitment to serve. While it doesn't spell out equity and inclusion in there, right, it certainly does lend itself to make the case for equity and inclusion. And with regard to culture, I would say that, yes, you should have a kind of baseline as someone's coming in, but I also think as someone who's recently joined a community, it's so important for that person to have their very own sense of what that culture is, right? As an example, coming into St. Luke's, which is known for a culture of kindness, right? What I have learned over the 11 months that I've been there, that is a cover, both a hindrance to the work, right? Because to be kind means to avoid challenging conversation for some, whereas for others, to be kind means to name the problematic issue. And I think there's also something to be said about actually recognizing the context and the culture that you're in. We sometimes want to jump into a place and do all of the heavy lift and the powerful, transformative social justice work. But if you are, as an example, in a community like New Canaan, Connecticut, there has to be a really deliberate strategy to coming at transformation. Because if you just go in kind of right in with what you know to be true in a context that is not ready, right? We brought in Robin DiAngelo. I wasn't here yet. I don't think we were ready for her, right? But that conversation certainly stirred the pot, again, created more work actually, but right, there was, I think, it was a noble intention. And so the only final thing I want to say about the policy piece, as someone who's in a senior admin role dedicated to this work, I can always go back to the vision for inclusive excellence when someone is challenging the changes that we're making. And I can say the board approved this. The school, this is an institutional commitment. This is not Jackie Nelson, a Black woman's angry agenda, right? So I think it's important that you have some foundation to stand on. And some of that does need to be co-created with the person that is kind of leading the work. And I often say that this is the job of one, but it's the work of many, because if too many people are in the kitchen, there's also subjective, like where we're going.
Thank you. Colleen, did you have a thought about that?
Just full agree. The kindness campaigns, although they look good on paper, don't address real issues, and in fact often avoid hard conversations because they're stressful, they're challenging, and I just think they don't work. You know, that's where we started. It took us years to get to the point where we use words like racism, homophobia, sexism, where we're teaching about bias. Whereas before we were talking, let's be kind to each other, let's make sure we include each other, and it doesn't. I don't see that making real change in a community.
Awesome. Ben, go ahead.
Just going to say that I think, you know, we have an inclusion policy at our school that certainly helps guide us with different decision making, but it's very much a working document. And I mean, I've been at the school for 4 years and we're constantly revising it, because I think if you're asking questions about inclusion, you're constantly shifting how best to do that work and what it means as a community. So I think just a reminder that I think policies or frameworks are really important, but it has to be kind of a living thing that is shifting as your community is evolving and as you're clearly articulating what you want to do as a community, what you stand for. So that piece is important, I think.
Yeah, I want to just point out, there was another question in the Q&A. If the leadership team and board are resistant to DEI and they have actively silenced any attempts to bring racism to light, who holds them accountable? If a school is unwilling to see the mass exodus of a specific race of teachers and students, who can keep track of that data? So, you know, I think, and there's a comment here about NEASC having a role. And I just want to say that I fully agree with that this is something that we are looking at as we go into schools and want to bring to light and to talk about. And I think that's really important. Any other thoughts on policy? Ted, you talked a little bit about community pushback. And Jacqueline, we talked about that before. Anything you want to say about that, Ted?
Yeah, I think Will had his hand up though. He wanted to speak to your point.
Great, Will.
Thank you. I just wanted to say, as a student doing this work, having policy in place, it makes our lives so much easier as well, because it makes it also, again, it can feel incredibly isolating to do this work, especially in a community that is somewhat resistive. So especially for students, if we want to try and point out what is right and what is wrong, having a policy behind us and having kind of the administration helping to make that delineation, it makes our work and our like commitment to this work just so much easier and so much more like fruitful, you could say.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, well, I guess what I'll add to that is that, and you know, Will and the other students on the call speak to it, is like the reason why we all got into this business is that we're invested in young people, and young people make us like think about the reasons that we're doing things in a good way. And so with some of the best successes that we've had are when our students have been front and center, going to school committee meetings, leading professional development for our staff, sitting at home with their parents and talking about what they learned in class. And so the dad who's listening to maybe one particular news station or reading an article has it challenged by, again, you know, the girl that I mentioned or anybody else. And the students often are the best sort of sword to cut through some of the garbage. And so if there's a board that's like saying, wow, we don't believe in this, having a bunch of cranky old people explain to young people who are invested in change why it's not worth their time, I think is a good strategy. And definitely has been used by us.
Yeah, that's awesome. That kind of leads to Kevin's next question. Kevin, do you want to ask that next one?
Absolutely. For the advisors, what are the most important principles to remember when doing this work?
And I feel like Ted just brought up one, make the students front and center, right?
Absolutely.
Any others?
Rachel, yeah, Rachel?
I think starting from each student and recognizing their voice. And I know with our student equity group, it started off with this Black Lives Matter is really important, right? And we're here in Finland, and it was easy to begin this conversation with what's going on in the States with police brutality is problematic. And we could all nod our heads, but that wasn't going to be any work. And so we came to a place of, okay, but what can we do? Why does this matter to us? Where is this in our immediate sphere? And I think that's the really important, if we're thinking about school as a training ground for being active world citizens, where are the little steps that students can see that they've made a difference, that it's internal, that they can make connections and empathize? And that's the role of the advisor, breaking it down. And maybe that's in curriculum, maybe that's in classes, maybe that's helping students see the impact they're making, which all of these students here today are saying this beautifully. And so they're trained to understand how to do this work on a larger scale later in their lives.
Thank you, Rachel. Jacqueline?
I would only add that I think with regard to working alongside students in this work, it is really important, to Ted's point about putting students front and center. And I would only add that I think putting them front and center as you stand by their side. I think there's a fine line between collaboration and paternalism. And I have seen many adults who think they're helping students and they're actually getting in the way because they are imposing some of the things and the behaviors that we've internalized to kind of get it right. And this work is messy, right? And so it kind of has to be. And so I think it's really important to model that. And as I think was said before, also modeling from our own place of vulnerability and not assume that we have all the answers, and so that the discovery is shared, because our students have way more wisdom than I think we often give them credit for.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Heather?
I really like what Jacqueline just said about this work is messy. I think I try to keep in mind everything we're doing this year is imperfect, but we're doing something. You know, I think we just have to have these conversations. We have to listen from to the students, learn from them, bring it to the wider community. Some of the members want to hear it, some don't. But I think, you know, our parents have charged us with helping develop good kids. So I think that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to help develop loving, supportive kids who listen.
Thank you, Heather. Alec?
Yeah, just to say as well, you know, just teaching people that, you know, there are some big issues out there. As you yourself, Ms. McCaskill mentioned, we're not going to solve this today. So it's about teaching people to embrace the struggle, to understand that this is something that's going to keep on going. We don't shy away from it. We embrace it. We work towards it. And we keep going that way. A lot of this work we're doing, social justice work, is about imagining places that we're never going to reach. So embrace that struggle and keep, you know, heading towards, you know, that place we want to get to.
Yeah, Al, that is a great point, because we always talk about getting to nirvana or a utopia, but each time we work towards excellence, that's when we start making those strides, hitting those strides, where we have an expectation of being better than we were. And that's all of us on this call, but all of us in society. Great, great, great points, folks. Thank you very much. Allison?
I think Diana still had one comment, and then we'll move to the last question. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Diana.
sorry. I just wanted to add something from the perspective of the student. I think that what everyone's saying is absolutely true. Like, the process that Stan has gone through has been lengthy this year, especially with COVID. And we've fallen and we've gone back up, and it has taken us time for us to find our flow. And we've had so many challenges, but what's been really helpful is, I guess, just having support from the faculty in terms that, like Jacqueline or Miss Nelson, said that it's less of a like hierarchy and more of a, we're next to you. If you need something, we're here, but we want to put you first and your ideas. Even if our ideas aren't perfect, we'll just throw them out there and we'll try and find if they'll work out. And if they don't, then they just don't. And if they do, then great. And I think that's just a really important part of the process. So I just wanted to reiterate that from the students. I completely agree with what everybody's saying, because it's really hard when, I think especially because I've never personally been in a part of a group like this, but I think this is teaching me so many life skills that I'm going to be able to use in the future as well. Like organizing, I'm not always going to have someone to hold my hand and to tell me what to do. So it's just great to be able to also find who I am as an activist.
That's wonderful, Diana. Thank you. And we're running short on time, but I want to give our students the last word. So students, and I'll let you think about this for a minute. If you could, you're talking to a whole group of educators, about almost 400 educators that are on here. What advice would you give them for moving forward with this work? Or what sort of personal message do you want to share with them just to end the webinar? And I want to hear from every student on the panel, so you can decide who wants to go. Anyone can go first.
Just mainly have faith that even though it's a long process, you're going to get there, and try your best to talk to your students and create that bond that I think was mentioned earlier, and just kind of try and raise as many opportunities as you can, because as a faculty member, you obviously have more connections than the students ever will. So use those to your advantage to just create really nice contacts for every group.
Great. Go ahead, Fennet.
I think it's just to stay hopeful and stay open-minded with what you're doing, because you're definitely, even though it's been a rough road, you're still making an impact through, even if it's through text messages, even if it's through a small group of 2 to 5 people, or it's just even if you're sitting after school with a teacher that you trust and you're just talking about your experiences. I think it's also you just have to say hopeful and stay open-minded and just have light in your eyes, and that you're making a difference, and that you're creating a path for people to walk on, and that people are just going to look up to you and do what you are doing, and to just make something greater and bigger.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Georgette?
So I think it's important for not even just administrators and teachers, but for each other, that we have to encourage conversations, listen to each other, be open to opinions, be ready to educate on things that you know. And I think just to be open to your students, try and encourage them to come to you whenever you need it, because I know some teachers, for me personally, from the first day of school, they would always say, if you need anything, if you need to talk, just come to me. So just be a prominent figure in your students' lives, and they'll be ready to come to you with open arms.
That's awesome. Thank you.
I mean, yeah, like everyone said, every step counts, and just, I guess, it's really being comfortable with a teacher, like everyone said, knowing that you're able to go to your educators and not have your ideas shut down is just really important.
Awesome. Will and Zaire, go ahead, Will.
I'll be quick, but I think the big thing that I've learned is to lead from a place of logic rather than emotion. This work is very personal, and it has to do a lot with looking in and being very vulnerable, but also when you lead, especially when you're organizing and trying to work with students, working from a place of emotion can sometimes be counterproductive. So making sure that voice of reason, that voice of logic never kind of goes to the wayside, and making sure that it's always there, because students might not be able to have that. And so being that voice of reason for them is so, so valuable.
Awesome. Zaire.
Yeah, I guess I would say from a student's perspective, titles are simply titles. And, as soon as you think you have something figured out, I guess that's the beauty of it, is that, there's always something else to learn. So I'd say, no matter the age, no matter the ability, no matter, their life experiences, you should always be able to take you should always be able to learn something from everyone you talk to, especially when we're talking about equity and inclusion. So I think that's the biggest thing for me.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. There are so many questions that we didn't get to today. Ben, thank you for throwing that in the chat about hiring. We wanted to talk about hiring practices. We didn't quite get there today. As Kevin said, this is just a first step for us, and we definitely plan to have a follow-up webinar this fall to delve more into these issues. But you guys have been such a wonderful panel. Thank you so much. And I hope you're looking at the chat and how much the attendees appreciate all the things that you shared. And I know that many of you would be available if people have questions. Your schools have your contact information. They could get in touch with you if there are things that they would like to follow up with. But thank you so much for sharing. And thank you, Kevin, for co-hosting. Again, I want to thank our wonderful panelists and commend you for all the work that you've done. And from NEASC and Kevin and myself, thank you. And we also want to say, just we're thinking of all of you around the world who are still dealing with the adverse effects of the pandemic, especially those in India and in all the countries that are waiting for the vaccine. And we are thinking of you and hoping that things get back to normal very soon. Our thoughts and our prayers are with you. So thank you so much, and have a great day, everybody.